Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to cover a range of topics that relate to CISOs. We'd love to cover things about the new rules and regulations that are coming out, sort of what drives the decision making there for you all. Some of the resource constraints. It's been resource constraints for 20 years. There will be more resource constraints for the next 20, but maybe we can touch on a little bit about sort of AI and automation and how that may actually help us in the industry. And then also some of just the challenges that you face in the role. Role gets harder and harder every day. Love to be open and transparent about what those challenges are for you, what it is for your team, some of the difficulties maybe managing up, down, horizontally. So we'll get into a range of things that sort of have helped you get into the role and maybe in some of the things that challenge you throughout the day. So love to start with introductions. I'll go first. My name is Steve Ward. I've been at Insight Partners for about 3 years as a partner. Predominantly only invest in cybersecurity companies. Before this was the CISO at Home Depot, CISO at TIA, ran some SecOps jobs at JP Morgan, and then really started in cyber in the Secret Service days. So I've been doing this for a while. We were talking earlier about this is my 120th year at RSA. But would love to just get some quick intros from you all.
Sure. My name is Carraig. I was first in the Intel world before coming over to cyber. This is my 4th program now at Avnet. Previously, I was over at H&R Block and then the Department of Agriculture before that. But yeah, looking forward to having this discussion.
Perfect. Jim Doggett, CISO currently at Semperis. Prior to that, let's see, long history, probably the longest of anyone, at least at this table. But 27 years at EY, both as an auditor and then a reformed auditor as a security professional. Then moved on from there and did CISO stints at JP Morgan, Kaiser Permanente on the West Coast healthcare, and then back to the East Coast for AIG before deciding to go to the startup world and smaller companies.
That's great. I am Kayla Williams. I am the CISO at Devo. This is actually my first CISO role. Prior to that, I like what you said. I'm a reformed auditor as well, external and internal. And then I did financial services, and I've been at SaaS companies for the past about 6 years now. Actually came up the GRC and third line of defense roles. So
cool.
Yeah.
Chris Hickman, I'm Chief Security Officer at Keyfactor. I've been with Keyfactor for 18 years, and prior to that, had another company that I helped do a startup and exit off of. This is my first CSO role. I've been in this role for 6 or 7 years now, and very pleased to share the stage with you all.
Awesome. So we've seen a lot of surveys come out over the years just about sort of the tenure of a CISO. It ranges about 18 to 24 months. And you look at some of the challenges and what's sort of been on the cover of newspapers over the years, the pressures that come with changing regulations, how CISOs have to make decisions, how they work with their legal teams to do so. When you came into the role, and Kayla, I'll start with you, was that top of mind for you of not just how I protect the company, but how do I also protect myself?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I've been in the role for just over 2 years. So while all of these new SEC regulations, some of the court cases that we've seen over the past 2 years come to light, and my background being from the audit space, document everything. It's how I've been trying to make sure that I instill in myself that I am not only protecting the organization, but myself from liability as well. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. And I try to be as thorough and detailed as I possibly can while bringing things to management's attention. I think that's the most important thing, is making sure you say, hey, I noticed this, whatever it might be. What do you think about this? What's our risk appetite? Is this acceptable or not? And if they say, well, it's not acceptable, but that's when the pen comes out, and I do actually write things down in pen still. I start to document things to protect myself and the organization from whatever may come, because the liability can come from anywhere at this point. I think we all have seen the news the headlines have just been left and right and center, and it's just really important to make sure that you're covering all of your bases while providing that transparency to make the right decisions for the organization through those decision makers.
Do you feel like it weighs on you on every decision? Or do you feel like it sort of is just a cloud that lingers? It's always that thing of like, at previous places, I always read an email twice. I read it on how it impacted me and my personal risk, and then I read it how it impacted the company that I was at. So do you think we're doing that more and more?
I think that one of the challenges that we have right now is the kind of evolving market in that space. And what I mean by that is when we, as CISOs or even as senior cybersecurity practitioners, when we first heard about, the Uber CISO being charged, and then we see what, SolarWinds CISO is going through right now, it was a little bit scary, maybe a lot bit scary for a lot of folks. In the Reddit communities, on Twitter, for InfoSec, you see a lot of talk about that. At the same time, if you look at some of these massive breaches, you're seeing more and more of these CISOs who the next week have a brand new job as a CISO somewhere else. And I almost wonder if the changing environment is that our role is becoming more of almost a scapegoat role in a sense, where it's almost an expected attribute. You get blamed, you get really, moved on from, and then you have a job the next week playing that same role. So I really don't know. For me, I'm really in Kayla's camp here, where if there's a risk, you gotta cover it. You gotta document it. Our job is to document and inform on risk, and if we don't do that, then we're failing as CISOs.
Yeah.
So Jim, I'd love, just with your tenure, I'd love to get your response on, back in the day, we always had that challenge of, is it a security role or a risk role?
Yeah.
We were always trying to figure out what hat to wear. Now, and even playing off of what you just said, is there a way to use some of the new regulations that have come out, some of the new pressures from regulators, to change this into more of managing risk than managing security? And I used to always tell folks, like, I can manage outrage up or risk down, you tell me.
Yep.
And sometimes I feel like security in the beginning, we got too comfortable with managing outrage up, and now we're sort of learning how to manage risk, not to zero, but to something that's more manageable for us.
Yeah, that's all CISOs today, in my mind, are security risk officers too. You have to be.
Yeah.
You can't fix everything by definition, so you have to prioritize. And quite frankly, the regulations now, while it feels like they're directed at us as CISOs, they're directed at the company. Mm-hmm. So the board is on the hook too. The C-suite, if you're not part of that C-suite, is part of that too. So to me, it's an opportunity. How can you elevate yourself to be part of that C-suite and to directly converse more with the board and with them and to gain their trust, so that when you do, and it does require us to change our technique, I think, a little bit. Historically, what we did was, we preached fear and doom and all this stuff. Now you've got to talk business. You guys can make the decision, but here are the risks in terms of what can happen, and we got to make a decision whether or not to remediate it or not. And like you said, you better document who makes that decision, because it doesn't bother me getting fired. That's okay. What bothers me is going to jail when it really comes down to it. So
Or being sued or anything like that, right?
Yeah, that's the part that I want to protect myself against, and between making sure you're insured, you're indemnified by the company, and on top of that, then that you document what you do or what decisions, because we don't make most of the decisions on security, quite frankly.
Yeah.
The company does, the business does.
Yeah, but I think to your point, once we start to actually see the C-suite and the board being brought into court, I think it was famously in the Uber case where the judge said, where's the CEO? Where's the CFO? Why aren't they here being tried for this? Because the CISO, we can raise risk up, down, and sideways all day. But at the end of it, we don't set corporate objectives and we don't control the purse strings.
Yep.
So if priorities of the organization change and that risk appetite fluctuates based on the appetite of the company, like maybe they're doing mergers and acquisitions or divestitures, or it's a recession or coming recession, and purse strings are tightened, security is usually the first thing to go, because it looks at it as, the company looks at it as a cost center versus building that trust and that brand.
Yep.
Because to your point, Carraig, CISOs get a job within a week. Mm-hmm. And it just sets a really bad precedent in that tone of, well, it's all right, they'll be fine.
And I think if you go one step further, if you look at like the SEC regulations as an example, right? They're really, you mentioned protecting, what they're really designed to do is protect the shareholders,
Right. Yeah.
right? And people outside and external to the company. So the board is always going to have that in the back of their mind and where they need to position themselves from a shareholder value standpoint. And it really can conflict with the security criteria, especially in hyper-growth type companies, If you don't have the ear of the right people in order to make the right investments to protect the revenue side of the business, then you get into this conflict between what should you be spending on, which part of the company are you going to invest in, because it's very unusual. You have unlimited resources to invest. So,
But I think going back to his comment, that's kind of the trajectory we're seeing, is instead of being a security executive, it's time to be a business executive. And we're seeing more and more emphasis on that, because it can't be an us versus them anymore. That's not effective. It has to be we're all on the same team and we understand what's going on.
Yeah, that's my last two roles were absolutely not technical at all. They were political.
Yeah.
Political and sales. That's basically what I spent all my time doing.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that just across the board now, that they're looking for good business leaders who just happen to be in security. And in the old days, it wasn't like that. It was, I want a technical person, I want an ops person, I want a risk person. And I actually love those conversations. I do get a little worried that the folks that replace you all, as we get closer to, at least maybe the three of us get closer to retirement. I want to include everyone on the panel in that.
I'd like an early retirement. I mean,
I've tried a few times.
no, it doesn't at all.
Who replaces us, I think, is a big question. I think there's a different level of mentoring that needs to occur, a little less about security and engineering and ops and more about being a business leader and wearing a risk hat. So is there a way that, we can't do a panel without someone mentioning AI, it's just impossible, but what I'm hearing now is that legal and compliance as it relates to AI and some of our own internal policies and procedures, they're playing a much bigger game and guiding them a little bit more. Is there a way that when you look at sort of the improvement of things, how do we make things better for the next crew that comes through, that we actually need to start embracing legal and compliance and the regulations more than in the days where I came up, and I tried to sideline the heck out of them. Like, they were barriers to progress and I didn't want them in the way. Do you think that changes? I'll open it to anybody.
I absolutely think it changes. Especially when you're a company operating in a global market. There's nuances that you just can't be aware of, that your legal and compliance and risk folks are going to be more familiar with, perhaps. What decisions that we would make maybe for a U.S. market are going to be a different set of decisions as it relates to those technologies for maybe some European markets. It is absolutely imperative that they be a part of the decision making and that they continue to guide the business to the least amount of risk. I mean, if you sort of look at it, it's a technology play, but less so, as has already been mentioned. The risk pieces come up, but then there's also the, how do you assess that risk correctly? And legal has a part of that, right? They're able to identify what the potential cost is of not getting it right, and so they have to be a part of the decision making. We can leverage AI for a lot of things, but somebody's still got to train a model, which means that what we have in our heads today, if we're going to leverage AI to sort of take over some of this thing and automate it, we've got to plug those interfaces in and make that data available. So I think AI's got a tremendous amount of upside. It's also got a tremendous amount of downside, but I still think people are at the core of making the right decisions for the business as it relates to how to expand and what technologies to adopt when.
AI to me is just a tool. That's all it is. It's a tool that has risk to it and it has upsides to it. It still comes down to making the right decisions of what's there. And when it comes to doing security better, it's just the latest tool. I still maintain that most of our security issues that are out there are the basics. We're still not patching correctly. We're still writing bad code. I can go on and on with that. But to me, it's how do we get better at doing those basics? And to me, automation is the key to that, whether it's through AI or some other tool. But I did surveys at two of the places that I went looking at what my staff was doing, my security staff. And over a third of their time was spent collecting data, just pulling it together, creating PowerPoints and board reports for me and all this. And here you've got security professionals that are hard to find anyway, doing, I won't call it administrative work, but work that is not what they were trained to do. And we need to fix that.
Yeah. Do we repeat the sins of our past when we look at where AI is going to take us and you measure it against what happened with cloud Do we think we repeat the sins, meaning most of us in the organizations I was in, they went cloud. You show up as the CISO, you do your initial maturity assessment, which I would never do again as a new CISO. And you take a look and you go, okay, you're in cloud. Yeah, but I'm not from a security standpoint. We always have this question of, does AI replicate what happened in cloud where they go much more quickly than we can? Or do you think we learned our lesson between what happened on cloud and the risk that we all ate for probably a couple of years before we felt like we secured it?
So I've actually had that question in my head for quite a while, right? And I think I look at it personally from a cloud is inevitable, AI is inevitable. We moved things into cloud long before we even called it cloud for all intents and purposes. And long before we had these complex models for doing the risk assessment that we do, we now have the benefit of having learned those lessons and are able to more proactively get ahead of it. I think we have a responsibility in our organizations to look at, what is our business doing with AI? Right? How are we using it? Because it's multiple different areas in a lot of cases. It's in product. It's the helping the development. It's coming at you from all different directions, and to look at what the security parameters are of those AI models, because they're not all from friendly countries and from friendly spots and so on and so forth. So I do think we need to adopt certain things from the cloud world, some sort of a security framework that we can all look at. How do we assess our vendors to know what is actually in a product, where our data is going, where it's living, so on and so forth. So I think cloud probably taught us a lot, that we can leverage it. Whether we're going to repeat our sins or not, that's really come down to how accepting we're going to be of it. Security was one of the last sort of bastions of technology to really embrace cloud. And I think, with AI, we have the opportunity to get ahead of it now and say it can be complementary if we can manage the risk accordingly.
I mean, I think the opportunity is there, but at the same time, if you look at current startups, if you look at current investments from the various firms, like whether it's Inside or any of the other ones, right now the amount of investment going into AI productivity type tools versus AI safety type technologies is the disparity is vast. Yep. So I almost wonder if we're getting in the same exact boat we did with cloud, because you're right, with cloud we had all of these amazing technologies and then security kind of caught up at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just actually going to pretty much say exactly what you were saying, Carraig, and it does also, to further accentuate your point, it comes down to integrity of the data, integrity of what you're using it, like the whole garbage in, garbage out. We learn with cloud, people started shoving everything in there without any regard for securing it, and it's pretty much the same thing. We think about the confidentiality of data first and foremost when we talk about AI, but we don't talk about the integrity of it. What's coming out? What's going in? Is it accurate? Is it truthful? Is it going to be harmful? So having those conversations and having the forethought of what could possibly go wrong with your code, if you're having it check your code, for example, and what might be the result of using something you can't trust.
So being a recovering CISO, I get to put you guys on the spot and push you on something, so which is fun. Used to have this saying of like, the business decides the strategy of the firm. IT is an enabler of that strategy, and security is the barrier to progress. It's sort of what we used to kind of joke around about. If we don't repeat the sins of the past, I'd love for each one of you to sort of quickly answer this. What do you do differently now than what's been done, say, 10 years ago when cloud started, where we were behind? What did we learn?
Yeah.
So like, is it, hey, I need to get in, I always hear this, like, I'm not in the room. Like, first things first, how do I get in the room with the business and IT at the inception of an idea, and we can build security into it? But I'd love to just go down the line. Like, is there one thing that you look at and go, I need to change, like the team needs to change, we need to do something differently to kind of get ahead of this a little better this time?
I think I bring a little bit of a unique perspective from the sense that my background was intelligence, not cybersecurity. So when I first made the move into cyber, and I came onto a team where there was almost a pride in being that roadblock that you're talking about, right? It was like, it was almost a power trip in a sense. We have the ability to say no, so we can, because we can be that blocker. And it was a really uncomfortable feeling. And I think what we're seeing is the effective program builders, those who can build effective programs, who can get in that room, are those that don't view it that way, who view it as a win-win solution. Obviously, I have my perspective, right? We need to go and protect the business. But I won't exist if the business doesn't exist. And we forget that. We forget that all the time. So if we can't get on the same page and become more of an educator, more of a partner, more of a yes, but versus a no, right? Or a yes, but how can we make this happen? We're not going to succeed.
Almost the same kind of words there. I would just say AI is inevitable, just like cloud was. So the best thing we can do now is get on board more quickly. Don't fight it
Right.
for the next 3-4 years till it's already there, and then we have to try to catch up on security. How do we build security into it? How do we put guardrails up now so that it limits the amount of damage? And I don't think it's that hard. I mean, at our company now, what we've just set guardrails, here's what data can be used for and what it can't be. And we've got a small committee that you take, if you want to use AI, you bring it to that committee, and there's a yes or no, of which I actually don't have a huge part in that. The company was making the decisions.
It's actually a great point on you saying that. Cloud was different in a way that we did say no.
Yeah.
It was a big fight for 2-3 years.
Oh,
of
yeah.
Just being like, I'm never moving my data to you. You're never going to protect it as well as I did, which technically wasn't true
Yes.
in the end. So it's a good point. You're not hearing no as much now as we did back then. Okay.
Yeah, I would say, we can't be the Department of No anymore. We have to be the Department of No problem. Yes and, or yes but that's where the documentation comes in.
We got to clip that.
Writing it down and saying, okay, this is what I see as a risk. Do you agree, disagree? And I think to your point, we don't make that decision. We don't make that call. The business makes that call. And we can support it and say, this is your decision. Here's how we secure it. Here's how we think you should do this. Will it cost money, yes or no? And then making the decisions based around facts and being able to say to the business in language they can understand, to your point earlier.
So security becomes an enabler almost.
Yes, exactly. I don't think we can go down that road of no anymore.
No, you
we
can't.
have to understand the business. We have to understand what their objectives are and then guide them along the way. We can draw the roadmap for them, but they're driving the car ultimately. Yes, F1 was last weekend, so I'm all in it.
Yeah.
And if they decide to go off course and crash, we have the documentation to show that we laid it out for them very clearly.
Got it.
I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. The one point I'll just emphasize on is, it's our responsibility to manage that up in an organization. If your board or your senior management is not on board to allow you to recognize and to navigate that and to put in place the appropriate checks and balances, you're going to fight it the entire way. Then it is going to become the no because you set it up that way. But if you set it up to succeed in the first place with a legitimate business case, right, of how it can enhance the organization, but how you are putting those guardrails, as was mentioned, in place, then it really can become you're going to hit a lot less resistance as you move forward.
But
with
I think
that.
it's also managing our peers as well, because they can be detractors and they can really set the course for your failure if they're not bought into what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
if you think about it, right, what technology exists today to stop somebody from uploading something into ChatGPT that is intellectual property, right? We don't have those controls in place other than on paper in a policy that sort of says, hey, you're not going to do this or you shouldn't do this. But, there's been many a case cited already where people have inadvertently let their IP out of their organizations, just trying to do their job better. There's still this evolution of stuff that needs to happen to allow us to protect ourselves in a technology type of way, right? Do we want to block, ChatGPT from our environments and say you can't use it? I'm not sure that's the answer. But then by saying you can use it, what happens then as a result? What is the worst case scenario? And so, how do you educate people for them to understand that as well is, another piece. So it's a combination of policy, it's a combination of education and adoption. But there's still we can stop bad things going in and out via email, but we can't yet with AI type engines.
I think there's two big differences now versus back in the cloud days. And one is we have way more support as CISOs from things like government regulations and public sentiment. I mean, I have a friend who's a CISO whose one of the board members is obsessed with like 60 Minutes, right? So they watch these horror stories on 60 Minutes on TV, and that's the topic of the next board meeting, which works great for them, right? Because the public awareness, the general awareness is far higher now than it's ever been because of these constant breaches that are in the news over and over again. The other point, though, is that we're seeing more emphasis. I mean, companies like yours, Chris, that are using security and doing secure by design, where they're starting to build it into the process from the beginning, which makes all of our jobs easier.
Absolutely.
If we can get more to that point of building security into the entire process from the chip all the way up.
A lot of your answers push me to asking you a question, because Jim, you brought it up before, that when we look at resources and headcount and the money we put into each one of these groups, are we not putting enough money into documentation, into issue management, remediation? Like, even for me as an investor, I'm not going to name names here, but the first couple investments I made were on remediation. It was on the back end of, like, okay, you want to figure out how to identify something, great, but I want to figure out how to fix something. To be honest, it didn't catch fire right away.
No.
But are we not putting enough resources on the theme? At least what I'm pulling out of is, when you go in a room, if you do get in a room with a business, are you documenting the risks properly to them? And are you consistently recording those over time on whether or not that risk goes up and down? As much as I hated risk back in the day because I didn't really understand it, are we getting more into the fact of, like, putting resources into documenting the things that occur and the adjustments to risk and how it impacts us as a team, the company? Because I don't hear CISOs. It's a really interesting theme, because typically you don't hear technical CISOs or ops CISOs talk about that end of it.
No.
Yeah, and this my little GRC heart is like about to burst. I don't know if you feel the
Yes.
same way having an audit. I feel so seen. Absolutely, having the risk management background, and this is why I really feel that coming up the GRC or risk management audit side is going to just continue to be the trend, is because it's now shifting to enterprise risk. It's no longer a bubble of technical risk. It's now you're impacting your brand. You're impacting your finances, because if you ruin the brand, customers are going to leave, prospects aren't going to come in. So it becomes enterprise impacting. So being able to invest in resources that can be the technical writers on those teams of engineers who just they're not interested, and that's okay, because it's not their, it's not what they're into. But having someone who can sit by their side and shadow and write those things down for them, and then bring it to the risk team and have those open conversations, I think will save us grief in the long run, because we can understand the process, we can pick out the risks, find the controls, whether they're people, process, technology, go with an informed list of tools or things that we need or the other teams need, and really support the business from that risk aspect. And I think it's been missing for a very long time, and especially in SaaS, where we're not regulated in that same way where financial services and healthcare may be, and have done that before.
So I want to sort of push on a last topic here that's been a sensitive one to me for years, is reporting structure, who you report to, where you report. Sometimes I wish we had more conversations around earning the right to sit at a certain table rather than being entitled in a way of, this is the person I should report to. But it is a hot topic. It comes up a lot. You hear a lot of conversations around who you report to. I think the last place I was at, I had one solid line into the CIO. I had a dotted line into the chief legal officer, a dotted line into the CEO, and the board was pretty active, the chairman of the audit committee.
Yeah.
So as much as we talk about it on where, sometimes I get a little worried of sometimes there's too many, and navigating the political end of telling everyone in sequence the same thing and not deviating from that and keeping everyone out of hot water. It's more of an open-ended question, but does it matter? Like, does it matter at all? Do you look at it and go, I should be successful no matter what? Does it matter who you report to or the level that you're at? Which is more important?
I can start off on that. I'll take more of a contrarian view. I don't think it matters. Something else matters. It's the role that you report to is less important to me as long as it's high enough. What matters is who you're reporting to. And a couple of things on that. One is, do they have your back? Do they understand risk and security, and they have your back to help support it in front of the board and other things? To me, that's more important than probably whether it's, and I've reported to a chief risk officer, chief information officer, chief CEO. I've reported to all of them, and it really didn't matter. The other part is it depends on you, the CISO. Don't go blaming it all on everyone else. I mean, you have to be able to step into that role like you just said. You have to be able to step up and be that person who earned a seat at the board level. And then it tends to work. That's just my opinion.
I couldn't agree more. I think it matters way more who the individual is you're reporting to, the type of person they are, because there's pros and cons for all of these. I mean, if you look at the recent surveys, a lot of your older companies like mine, I report up to the CIO, right? A lot of companies that have been around for a while at H&R Block, it reports up to the CIO. But a lot of your startups, they're reporting up to the CEO, they're reporting to the CTO or CFO, legal. I mean, there's all sorts of new things. The newer startups, they tend to be taking a lot more of a variable approach. Bottom line, for you to be effective, you have to build a relationship, you have to make your case, and whether that case is a conflict or not, it's going to be pretty much no matter who you report to, and then it becomes a matter of partnering to figure out where that middle ground is that you can both find some, I guess, agreement in.
Yeah, I've had CISOs that I know even recently that loved their job and never thought about leaving, and had their CIO leave, and within 6 months say, I'm not getting along with my new CIO, I have to leave.
That would be me,
Right?
literally.
And I can't, I hate when we all agree. I'm trying not to, but I agree 100% that it is the person that you're reporting to.
Yep.
I mean, I took the job at TIA because Annabelle was the CIO, and when I sat down with her, I was like, I'm in. I don't even care what you pay me. Like, I wanted to work for her. But is it their job to understand us, or is it our job to speak their language?
The latter.
Yeah.
I would actually disagree with that. I think it has to be both.
Yep.
I think it has to be both. We have to do our best to educate. We have to. But at the same time, especially like if you're reporting to a CIO, then they have to recognize that security has to be part of the process. If you're reporting to a CFO, they have to recognize that security does cost, and you have to find that balance. So while it's really, really important for us to be able to speak their language, so we're not out, using technical speak that's going to, alienate them. At the same time, I feel it's important for them to be able to at least try to understand where we're coming from, to be able to empathize with what we're trying to do, because a lot of times we're looking at things completely differently.
Do you think they don't understand us do you think they don't understand us, or they don't want to understand us because most of our conversations are led with negativity? I was always worried about, it seemed like whenever I was in the room, and I've had people say that, I love hanging out with you at the bar, I just don't want you in the conference room. That was one of the most insulting things I think a peer ever said to me.
Because you're picking up the tab.
Yeah, probably. Do you feel like it's become such a negative space that we have to be conscious now of coming in, helping solution?
You see, I think it comes down to something that's fundamentally changed, and we talked about it earlier, right? We are now learning to speak business. That's the language that those roles tend to speak as well, whereas we used to come in a couple of years ago and go, this technology and that technology, and plug this in, and here's a diagram that shows everything. I need about $500,000 budget, okay? Yeah. That's where they look at it and go, well, what's it going to do for my business, right? How does it enabling my business? What risk are you taking away, and what value are you putting back on the table in exchange for that spend? And I think that's when they were happy to see us in the bar, because they knew we were nice people, but they weren't happy to see us in their office. I do think that is starting to shift. At least I'm noticing in my conversations with people and in their daily lives that shift is starting to take place, so that they are having more amicable conversations that end up in the same place, but with a different realization of value.
So can I push then on, where should the budget come from? Should you get your budget from the CIO, or should you get your budget from the business?
Oh, it comes from the business, in my opinion.
It comes from the business either way.
Yeah, because with security, the CISO, while the role itself is still, I would say, it's still new. We've been around for 15, 20 years, but the role, it's compared to like a CFO or CEO, where it's been flushed out, that you know what you're accountable for. our role is different. My job is going to be different from their jobs, right? Every company has their own type of CISO and style and things that they're accountable for. But the one thing that hasn't changed is that security is everyone's responsibility. So those budgets that are in, say, finance or sales and marketing for their tools that they're purchasing, so like the Salesforces, the Concurs, those tools have security settings in them. We don't set those security settings. The business does. We tell them, we guide them, we tell them how to do it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if they don't flip a switch and turn on MFA, we're accountable, even though we had absolutely nothing to do with it. So the budget really has to be, I think, spread across the business, because they have to then pay for an admin, a Salesforce admin or a Concur admin, to do those things and make sure it's set up correctly.
And if they pay, they're accountable. Now, that also means they can say no, too.
Yes.
More
exactly.
quickly. But again, then they take the account of, that's how do you transfer risk just from us to the business? If they make a decision to not put MFA in, which they may do, then they have to carry the risk that goes with it. And that comes back to risk tolerance and management, and how do you document in your risk register how decisions are made, and how often you revisit them. I could go on and on.
And if you're operating a SaaS platform, there's a part of it that's got to come from the product side as well.
Yep.
I mean, it is your brand, it is your product. It is. It really is cross-functional in every respect. If you don't have the right certifications, it's going to impact your ability to sell. If you don't have the, if you get a breach, it's going to impact your brand. So it really does propagate across the entire business in very impactful ways.
I think this has actually been one of the challenges we've had. Is a lot of CISOs have an empire building mentality, where they try to bring all the security stuff in, they try to capture the budget for all of that. But when you do that, you effectively, in my opinion, tell the business it's not their responsibility.
Yeah.
Whereas the flip side is, you don't fight for the entire empire. Rather, you have that health department kind of a approach where you have hands in, right? You can go in and check, but you build into the total cost of ownership for all of the things that they need to do business. So if they want that SaaS platform, securing it's part of total cost of ownership. If they want laptops for their employees, securing it is total cost of ownership. And that all goes back to the business.
Yeah.
If you walk into a CRO and say, what is it that you need in the way of a platform to be successful? And how do you want to operate with that? And then in exchange for that, say, here's the controls that I need around it to keep your information safe. You've just partnered with that business unit. If you walk in and say, anything you do, you need multi-factor authentication, and you need this, and you need that, and you need this, you've automatically created sort of an adversarial type of a relationship. So I agree with you. The CISO role almost becomes small, but all about partnering across the business with all the different divisions that require your expertise.
And that's risk management, though.
Yeah,
that's exactly what
absolutely.
that is. That's
That
where
is risk management, yes.
that's having the documentation that nobody likes to do, but also having the appetite and saying, here's my recommendation. You don't want to follow it. That's great, no problem. But, and then go from there.
I would love for folks to be more vocal about that, because I go back to the mistakes I made. I think the most misery I caused myself is when I lobbied to take over firewalls. And then I got them,
Why?
and I started immediately lobbying to get rid of them. And it was an empire building type thing. I wanted more purview. We weren't good partners with them, so if I can't influence you, I want to control it mentality. And I think we're starting to see more and more of that. On the walk down here, I had a Fortune 100 CISO who retired that said they had to hire 2 people to do his job. And my asked question back was, is that a bad thing? And he's like, no, actually, I don't think it is. I think it becomes much more manageable. I do think we got into empire building, and I think that, sort of to tie it all together, the empire building came in because we thought that would elevate us through the org faster, because it was body count numbers.
Yes.
How
Also
big is
makes
your
the
org?
job
How-
harder.
Yes, 100%. There's a few of those where I kind of wish I took on IT risk. Should have never done that. We had no idea what the difference between first line, second line, third line was. It was all an amalgamation of things. Let me push this, we'll continue to go up the stack there on the last question here, which is the SEC and others, are they focusing on the right thing when they say we need more CISOs on boards? Or should it be a different statement that they make, or something else that they should be focusing on? Do we need more CISOs on boards? How does that sort of make you all feel? Is that, again, calling myself out, when I got on the board of Mimecast, it was a public board, and it was my first board, and I was ecstatic. And by the way, my first board meeting, I made a comment about their real estate expenses being too much, and the chairman of the board leaned over and goes, "Why don't you stick to security for a little bit?" It was an
Be a good
amazing, yes, an amazing check that was my first board meeting. He was right. But do we need more CISOs on board members because we want the boards to think more securely, or do we need CISOs on board members because we want the experience because it makes us better presenters to our board?
I'd say it's a combination of both of those myself. I don't. It doesn't have to be CISOs on the board, but what you need is people that understand security on the board so that they can understand what you're saying to them. And again, traditionally, at least through my history, the closest to a CISO I had on a board was a CIO.
Yep.
And a CIO typically doesn't have a lot of depth in security. So I think we made some wrong decisions probably at times with there because it was done from an operational perspective, not a secure operational perspective. But that's just me.
But I think if you partner, and back to what I was saying earlier about partnering with the individual groups instead of empire building, then you get representation for security across the entire board. You don't necessarily need to be there if you've done a good job of educating, explaining, and advocating what the benefits are. They'll help carry that message into the boardroom. But security has to have a spot in the conversation.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably however best to do it, if it's a person in the room or doing it by proxy through other folks in the room. Security has to be an agenda item. Where are we at with security? How is it impacting our business positively or negatively? How are we doing against cost controls and things of the sort? And are there any unforeseen risks that we have not yet talked about? And that's a conversation that needs to happen each and every time.
Well, for me going to the board, I always made sure I had one or two board members that were on my camp already. In other words, I met with them in advance.
Yep.
And if they understood security better, it would certainly help. But you never go to a board not with support already.
Yeah, and for me, I report into general counsel, and we report our security risks up to our board. So if he can't explain it clearly and concisely, then I've failed him in that sense. And there are times when I might not have an answer to a question that the board has. And we say, okay, we'll get back to you on that, and we will go to the SMEs, who are the technical operators, and we will ask that question and make sure that we're giving the right information. CISOs cannot be expected, or anybody really, to be expected to know all of the security risk or just risk in general, because technology is evolving too fast. The landscape is far too vast now. You can't be a SME in everything. So there will be opportunities to say, I'll get back to you on that, and then go and get the right answer.
Yeah.
Part of me is concerned, actually, about their ask for a CISO to be on a board for a couple of reasons. One, I do agree totally that we need allies on the board. We need educated people on the board. But going back to even our previous conversation about who do you report to, which CISO would that be, right? Because I know a lot of CISOs that are highly technical and don't have that business EQ that I really strive to bring to my organization, right? And if you have a limited number of seats on the board and you have a CISO that doesn't have a broader experience to be able to check more than one box, is your board itself and the leadership of your company then potentially hindered as a result of that?
Yeah.
So I completely agree that our companies need to be held accountable from a cyber perspective. I mean, we don't want anybody negligent, but that doesn't require a CISO to be on the board. It just requires people on the board that care, that ask the right questions, and that are an ally.
Agree. Well, I think they made a mistake by saying that we should be on the board rather than saying the board should be more focused on enterprise risk that includes security.
Absolutely.
That's what I actually think they were trying to accomplish.
Agreed.
It wasn't the person, it's just that the board needs knowledge of this risk in IT and security, and if they have that knowledge, then they will do a better job protecting the company.
The CISOs heard I should be on boards.
Yeah.
And that's been a challenge of mine of going like, maybe, maybe not. And,
Well, it's the most simplistic way to address the question.
Yeah.
And at times that probably does make sense.
Yeah, definitely. So just last question here. We are at RSA, and I try to stay as positive I can just in the space. So if we could just go down the line, what's the most excited sort of technology space over the next 3 to 5 years, could be 2 to 3 years, but is there something that you're thinking about now going, all right, we're just starting to hear about it, starting to see things pop up? Doesn't have to be a company, but a domain, a space. I mean, even to give you time to think, like, I think the LLM side completely revamps DLP. I think DLP has been dead man walking for years.
Yep.
And I think that those models that get trained will actually make that technology 1,000 times better than what it's been. But any sort of prediction, thought on the next 3 or 4 years?
For me, it's quantum computing. I'm hyper-focused on the quantum computing space and the impact that quantum computing is going to have on cryptography. And the things that organizations need to be doing today to prepare to mitigate that risk. Organizations are behind the curve. They don't necessarily realize that. One of the surveys we did recently shows that only 20-some% of organizations are actually even thinking in this space yet. Yes, it's got a 10-year timeline till it can become real. Or is projected to become real, but it's going to take organizations at least that long to do that shift of cryptography in their organizations at scale in a way that's not disruptive to the business. So, for me, that happens to be something that I'm very focused on, because I think it is, while everybody's trying to figure out what to do with AI, I'm concerned because they're not also looking at these other spaces. I think there's too much focus on AI. Everybody wants to put money into it. Nobody knows exactly what they want to do with it,
Yeah.
but they may actually be missing the thing that's coming up behind
It's a
them.
shiny ball, you have to chase it.
Yeah.
Like it says in everybody's car, right? Objects may be closer than they appear
Yeah.
in the mirror,
Yes.
and I think
Yeah.
that one is the one that's
What's
coming up.
amazing that I love about that is you look at certain countries that are adversaries of ours that have made it very clear that the data that they steal, they don't care if it's encrypted.
No.
They will eventually get to
Yep.
it, and it's just
Harvest
harvesting
now,
is
decrypt later
Patience.
is
It's an
happening.
amazing
Yeah.
20, 30, 40-year Intel plan.
Well, you look at China put 15 billion last year into their quantum computer.
Yeah.
And again, like AI was mentioned earlier, the investment is going in on the front end to build the computers and do all of that. There's a much less investment going in onto the back end to protect us from the eventuality of that.
Yeah.
So if we're not careful, it's going to be here, and we're all going to be in a really difficult spot. So that's what I'm looking at.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, you and I should definitely have a conversation, because I'm thinking about quantum AI,
Yep.
right? So 10 years out for quantum, but AI is going to have such a lead on that, put them together. What's going to happen? So I'm in the same camp as you. Like, people should be thinking about these things now, starting to prepare. And to your point, they're stealing and we're harvesting data now that's encrypted that they're just sitting on. It's a gold mine in 20, 30 years, but those government entities that are doing that, our enemies, have that amount of time.
Yep.
So it's definitely something that's coming, and we all have to be prepared for.
Yep.
I'm going to bring it back a little shorter term than the 10 years.
Yeah.
I can't think that far ahead. That's a lifetime ahead, assuming I'm still around even then. To me, it's right now all about identity. I don't know. It just, every aspect of security that I hit, it comes back to, do you know who it is and you know what they're doing? And to me, that is the, again, especially with otherwise you don't. You can't protect the devices anymore. You can't protect, where people come from, the location, anything. So it all comes down to, you got to know who they are and what they're doing. And whether that's using AI, machine learning, whatever it is to do that, we've got to get a lot better at protecting our identity systems.
Yeah. Can I just give you a stat? Over the last 2 or 3 years, identity has been first or second on budgets for CISOs, and has been first or second on investments from VCs.
Interesting.
Which is then makes it absolutely incredible to me that we're not in a better place on the identity side.
Yeah.
So I'm with you 100%. I think my 2 predictions are DLP and IAM get just completely disrupted over the next 2 or 3 years.
Well, part of it, identity, I think we spent so much money on how to provision better and deprovision, as opposed to the identity system. And do we actually know what people are doing and who's doing it, as opposed to just having a great system to get them off? Because again, regulations and compliance has forced us down this path of, we got to, how many hours does it take to get someone off the system when they leave?
Got it.
As opposed to.
And so there's 2 things that I'm kind of really interested on, again, more short term. One is kind of identity with the AI aspect. Right? I heard a presentation recently from a company that's developing chips to better process the AI models. And they were talking about how right now the voice AI, the verbal AIs, not the written ones, but the verbal AIs are so good that when people walk into the office while they're testing, they think they're interrupting meetings because they can't tell the difference. They even come with breathing and everything, right? So going back to your point, if an AI can replicate you to the point that I can't tell the difference, how do we verify who you are, right? And I think we're going to see a huge increase in potential threat from that field, given the rate at which AI is advancing without those safeguards that are currently in place. The flip side, though, is I've been doing a lot of advisory work for some stealth startups that are leveraging various AI models, doing things like what you were talking about earlier, Chris, like how do I stop people in my company from uploading documents or typing things that they shouldn't into these AI models? The challenge is, even if they want me to be a design partner and give me their technology essentially for free as part of that, they're still charging a significant amount of money because of the pass-through costs, because AI right now is very expensive. So a security budget is already being constrained within most organizations.
Yeah.
How is that going to have an impact if we have to defend against some of these threats? And the tools that we use are leveraging these massive consumption models that are very expensive and that cost pass-through. How do we then afford that from a security perspective?
Very interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Excellent. By the way, you just brought up the budget thing. I hate that we do this where security is X percentage of the IT budget and not Y percentage of the revenue of the company. It's always driven me insane because we're always like, oh, it's between 7 to 15% of the IT budget. But the IT budget we look at as a percentage of revenue, again, as an enabler. I was never able to get away from it. But look, I know you guys are slammed, busy. This is the craziest week, probably all of our years. So thank you for taking the time to hang out for 45 minutes and talk through some important issues. Enjoy the rest of the week. Try not to go insane with 30 meetings a day. Get your steps in, as we all do, and maybe we'll see you back here next year.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you.
Good.